Welcome back, everyone. We are about to have an exciting interview with Dr. Wallace J. Nichols. He is the author of The Blue Mind, and he's going to be talking to us about how water has such an enormous impact on our well-being. We are focused this month on healthcare, but I have really tried hard to make sure that we define healthcare as a much broader concept than simply whether or not one likes Obamacare or not, whether or not someone prefers Medicare for all or not. What we're talking about is prevention. We're talking about innovation. We're talking about using the science of delivery as well as the science of how we treat. There are many different parts to healthcare, and to me, the one that gets the least amount of attention but can have the biggest impact on our nation is really that prevention space. And so today we're excited to have Dr. Nichols with us to be able to talk about how it is that we can better approach the connection between the environment and our bodies, and how it is that we can address life with a healthy lifestyle. But I also like to say healthy community, healthy nation. That's how we make sure that we're able to be resilient and ready for the future. And here he is. We will go ahead and go through our process of getting him online. And while that's loading up, I'll just continue in response, and I think with a bit of a grin, I say that on his recommendation, he talks about Blue Mind for all, which I love this play on words. So I think we're going to explore that a bit today. Dr. Nichols, thank you so much for joining us. Where are
My
you
pleasure.
located today?
I am right now in Davenport, California, which is a tiny coastal town in Santa Cruz County on the Monterey Bay. So just a little bit north of Santa
Wonderful.
Cruz. Yeah.
Wonderful. We are live from Cincinnati, Ohio today, and we have a bit of a rainy day, so I am inside with not the best backdrop, but it is the reality of live. We cannot be
Yes.
outside.
Yeah. No, this technology allows us to, stay in touch like this and have conversations live like this wherever we are, which is wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, this is really the demonstration of a positive use of social
I
media and
agree.
connectivity. And, and we can't lose sight of that positive side, because we do so often talk about the negative sides of social media and constant connectivity, but there are definitely upsides to a learning concept, as well as to understanding how all of us can better understand others' perspectives.
Yep.
I think there's some light in that. Now, I've given a little bit of intro before you came on, so I'm going to jump straight to you and let you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got to this point, and in particular, what drove you to write this book.
So I'm a marine biologist. My full name is Wallace J. Nichols. Everybody calls me just by my middle name, J, my middle initial, J.
Well, I go by JJ, so I think we
Yeah,
can declare
exactly.
that J.
Yeah.
I'm in this. And what does J stand for?
It stands for Joseph, and
Joseph.
I'm the
Okay.
fourth person in our family to have the name. We actually named our daughter Wallace Nichols as well. Her middle name is Grace. So we broke some rules. That's maybe a whole other conversation, but
You realize you're talking to a psychologist, right? I
yeah,
just want to make sure we
yeah.
point that out.
She loves it, in fact, and I think she's proud to kind of be the family member who broke the patriarchal stream of naming. I think it will wear well in her hands, I guess. But
I love it.
I'm a marine biologist, and I've studied sea turtles and marine protected areas and plastic pollution for decades. But I started wondering about, well, I wanted to be a marine biologist because it started at a young age, and I think it happens to a lot of young water lovers. It started out because I love the water. I love the feeling of being near or in or on or under the water as a kid, and I wanted to devise a career that allowed me to feel that way. And as a kid, so I'm going to go right into the psychology part. But as a kid, I was adopted. I had questions about who I was, and I stuttered. So I didn't always feel like I felt in here on this planet or in my community or sometimes not even in my family. But in the water, I felt good. I felt whole. I felt like nobody was going to ask me a question that I couldn't answer or that I couldn't, that I couldn't speak clearly to. And so the water was my happy place. So I became a marine biologist, have had a great career as a marine biologist, but I always wondered about that piece of it. Like, what is it about being by the water or being in the water that healed me in a sense or made me feel better? And I found out that a lot of other people feel this way. That's where we go on vacation. That's where we go to relax. That's where we go to hit the reset button. It's where we go to grieve and mourn. So I wanted to read about that idea, that basic, so the psychology or the neuropsychology of time spent in water or near water. I went looking for a book about it, and I found nothing.
I was going to say, I know the principal end of this.
And so I tried to get somebody else to write this book that I eventually ended up writing. I pitched it to Oliver Sacks, a late, great neurologist and water lover himself. And he said, it's a fine idea. You do it. And I said, oh shit, that's pretty serious coming from him. And so it took 5 years to re-educate myself in a sense. I know you can appreciate this and all of the issues that you become so knowledgeable at in your work. Took a deep dive, pun intended, into this subject. And the other end came out, this is my book called Blue Mind. Got it done and launched into the world. But it wasn't really about writing a book. It was about these conversations, speaking to people like you about this idea that water is part of our toolkit, part of our medicine chest.
It's a great way of saying it, part of our toolkit.
Yeah. And we've undervalued, as a result of leaving this out, I think we've undervalued water. And we've done, say, a disservice to its potential, really, for making our lives better. And as a result, when you undervalue anyone or anything, bad things happen every time, whether we're undervaluing each other for whatever reason, or undervaluing historical places, or undervaluing nature. Bad things happen. So really, my goal is to fix the value equation, essentially, to update it in a way that makes sense, it's based in science, and the best available psychological research and neuroscience research, and to put these ideas into the hands of people who can use these ideas. So that's my introduction.
I love it, and so now my brain is just firing to ask 100 questions, but I'll start at the beginning. What is it that you found? 2 or 3 top points that you found that water really has an impact. And I'll preface this by saying is, last month we focused on the environment, and I had the distinct pleasure of being able to talk with a number of marine biologists, and we really focused on recognizing that people see the environment as just a place in which we operate, not so much, and maybe a commodity, something we own, but not so much something that we value and respect. And to your value point, when we approach it in that way, we see it as something we can just use up as ours to own. When we change the discussion to being a respect factor and recognizing the positive value that it can have to us, if and only if we treat it with care and, as you said, the respect, what is it that we gain by doing that? I think that value matters.
Yeah, it's it's kind of intuitive. If you just pause for a second and reflect on what's your water, what's the water you dream about spending time with? What's the water you first fell in love with? What's the water you go to when you need that break? Already. You don't need my science or anybody's science to know that works for you. It might be your bathtub. It could be, in the Midwest. I, spent a lot of time in the lakes and rivers of Indiana and of Illinois, not just the Great Lakes, but the smaller ones and even the tiny ones, the quarries, the water-filled quarries. So really what happens, we started out talking about technology, but what happens when we engage with our water is first and foremost about what we leave behind. So we leave a lot of the noise, we leave the screens, we leave the to-do lists. We generally unplug. If you're going to get wet, your phone doesn't want to go with you. Your screen, your laptop, your desktop generally don't want to be in the water with you. So we leave that behind, we unplug, we log out, and the auditory and the visual environment is simplified. Right? If we just stop there, that's pretty good. And that's a rare commodity these days, when we wake up and maybe the first thing we do before we're out of bed is look at a screen, and we go about our busy days and our checklists and our overstimulated lives. And maybe the last thing we do back in bed is look at a screen. A break from that is incredibly valuable. It helps us sleep. It helps us connect to ourselves. It helps us connect to each other socially and even romantically. It boosts our creativity. It reduces stress hormones. And so the people who need Blue Mind the most are our veterans, our first responders, our health practitioners, the people who day in and day out are helping us heal, are saving our lives, are on the front lines. Even people who are in media who are giving us the bad news every day on air. I know.
I throw out politicians.
Yeah, politicians. Like, do you want your politicians to be burnt out, stressed out, distracted beyond belief? No. You want them to know where their reset button is and use it on a regular basis, daily, ideally. Whether that's, music, time with family, some time in nature in whatever form it takes. That's what Blue Mind is all about, is just, make sure you have access to your reset button and you know how important it is, because it affects everything you do, your ability to think clearly, to make big decisions. And whether you're a politician or an ER nurse, you need on the fly to be making good decisions, without a lot of runway sometimes. And so that's really what it's about. It's about reminding people. And so I come at it from the water perspective, but it can be water metaphorically or water literally. So what's your water? Some people have said, my water is music. Some people have said my water is Lake Michigan or the Atlantic Ocean. Some people have said my water is my bathtub or the food I eat. I really enjoy stopping and enjoying a meal at the end of my day with my family. So, we can stick with the actual real water, not the metaphorical kind. But it turns out that our lakes, our rivers, our oceans are so valuable to our emotional health, to our creative health, to our spiritual health, in ways that are, I think, under-recognized, under-prescribed. We're not taught it in school. I was never taught in school that if you're having a really cruddy day, go to the lake. It'll make the day better. It'll help a lot.
Can you imagine if we started telling children to go to the lake?
Really, that's a big, yeah.
It is, and it's something that they do in other nations.
Yeah.
In my previous job, I was a U.S. delegate to NATO, and particularly in international education policy. And so spending time, I actually went out of my way to spend some significant time with our Nordic friends, and really understanding the education systems there. And I will attest to the fact that what you're saying in Finland is going to be something that they actually will do, whether it's actually going to water or metaphorically going to water, though, that is being explicitly taught to their young people.
And they're building the infrastructure to allow for it to happen, whether it's hot springs or swimming pools or access points into the fjords and lakes and rivers throughout Scandinavia. So there's the educational side of it, where you make sure every kid and adult knows about this idea of Blue Mind, knows about their Blue Mind, and has access to it. And you could say, well, this is a very niche-y conversation, but Once you start pulling these strings, you realize, like many of the other topics you've covered, the strings are really connected. So
Yes.
you start talking about public health, you start talking about emotional and mental health, you start talking about how we care for our first responders and veterans. You start talking about how we do end of life care. Imagine if hospice professionals, end of life health professionals, all had this in mind, and they asked their patients, would you like to get in your water one more time? And it kind of makes me tear up because I missed an opportunity with my I'm adopted, so I have two fathers. With my biological father, missed the opportunity to get in the water one more time with him. And so I encourage people, if there's somebody who's aging or near the end of their life for whatever reason, and they love water, go there with them. Trust me on this one. It will be time very well spent. Get in the water or go sit by the water with them, even if it requires special accommodations and a bed in a van or whatever it is. But also for people who work in end of life care, they need to take care of themselves and the families of the client or the patient. They're going to be dealing with a lot of grief and a lot of stress, and water is a great place to mourn. So whichever subject you may choose, when you add some water to the conversation, it gets better, it gets interesting. And our lakes and our rivers and our oceans need to be healthy, as you said earlier, for any of this to make sense. If you go to the water and your goal is to relax and boost your creativity, and you end up picking up trash, that's a different activity. That's not
There's
Blue
a lot
Mind.
of that.
Yeah, that's a whole other experience. You're gonna end the day very frustrated, maybe a little grossed out. Maybe you'll have a sense of accomplishment that you made a contribution to cleaning the beach, but it won't be the restorative experience that you hoped for when you went to the waterfront. And that's very unfortunate, and that's a huge loss. Um, these are our waterways, and they are our source of emotional and spiritual health. And when we pollute them in any way, we're not just doing ecological and economic damage, we're doing emotional damage. And that's been under recognized, underappreciated. And as we discussed earlier, when we undervalue anyone or anything, it's not good. So that's really the message. It's simple in its core, but then it has I'd say far-reaching implications. Yeah.
Yeah, so I agree with you. It's simple at its core. Um, and obviously, I agree with everything you're saying. I come from a slightly different perspective as a psychologist,
Mhm.
but in complete complement to what you're addressing. And so then I ask myself, well, if it's the case that this is well understood, well known, and has major implications, why is it that we're undervaluing it?
Yeah.
And one of the things that I find is that we talk about caregivers taking time for themselves, whether that's a mom, stay-at-home mom, who we
Mhm.
know have some of the highest rates of burnout. That's a caregiver for end of life, or a severely ill child or parent or spouse. Whether we're talking about vets, we we know it, but we don't employ it. There are
Yeah.
things in our daily lives that keep us from going there. I was recently in Savannah waiting in line, a ridiculously long line, I might add, for ice cream. And my son and I were going, is this better be like the most amazing ice cream because it's very hot. And a gentleman behind me was former Army. He was wearing a T-shirt that suggested that. And so I started a conversation with him, and we started talking about how the military has changed. And he says, they just don't do boot camp like they used to. They give these guys all kinds of time off. And I said, well, interesting point on that. And the best way I've been able to explain it to folks is nobody trains for a marathon by running a series of marathons
Mhm.
daily,
Right.
because you would literally burn out the body before you ever got to the competition. And so what I explained to him was that we have figured out that in order for not just our vets, but our active duty military personnel, in order for them to be able to have a resilient mind, to be able to receive the stress chemicals, to be able to reset and focus, to maintain their ability to make decisions under extreme stress, we had to actually teach them meditation skills. Once you get to the point where Marines are doing meditation,
Right.
you know this
Yeah.
is evidence-based,
Yeah.
because we're not going to ask them to do this. And so I give that example because I think it's more extreme.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people don't realize that we really are doing these things with our military personnel, because at the end of the day, we want to keep them safe, alive, and thinking under fire. So if it's good enough for them, it's probably good enough for all of society,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I agree. That's a great. I work with a group called Force Blue, and
Oh, okay.
they're
Yeah.
a team of special ops veterans across all sectors of the military and from around the world even. And they would just say absolutely amen to what you just said. They lived it, they've experienced, they know that a strategy based on burnout is not a strategy. It's really just not a strategy. And it's not only is it not sustainable, it's not even a strategy. It's a bad idea. And many of these men and women were trained in aquatic operations and weren't really allowed to relax. They saw the ocean as work and as a danger and as extra pay, frankly. And
That's common.
yeah, yeah. And so when
Reality.
they're now using their skill set to restore coral reefs and finding that it's also healing themselves to be doing, it's still work related diving. It's not purely recreational, but it's beautiful in a way, and it's service. And so the combination of being in the water, being useful, and serving again is good for the coral reefs, but it's good for themselves and it's good for their families. And so it's really, I think your example to look to the military in their, as they go through their logic models to figure out what works and what doesn't, realizing that meditation works, things like Blue Mind work, and if we can, as a society, follow their lead in that realm and say, okay, if it works for our highly trained individuals that are serving our country, first responders, military, it can work for our kids, it can work for our caregivers, it can work for moms and dads, and let's talk about that. And I mean, you've seen the growth of this conversation about meditation. Used to be this kind of hippie coastal thing, and now it's on the cover of Scientific American, The Science of Meditation, and
Yes.
it's being used to win Super Bowls and to win
Yes.
wars, frankly.
Yes.
And you're seeing companies like Google bringing in, scientists who study meditation to teach their staff how to remain productive and resilient. So that's all. I'm optimistic about that. And to your question, like, so we know it. Why don't we do it? Well, that's the $1 million question. I think there are certainly forces pushing back, but that's not the only reason. I don't think it's just a matter of the people who have something to lose through these ideas pushing back. Because I haven't really experienced direct threats from, say, the pharmaceutical industry about my work. They're certainly not, backing it, but it's. I think it's more than that. It's, change can be slow. Sometimes
Yeah.
the biggest, most obvious ideas are the last ones to be embraced. But sometimes it just all of a sudden happens. It's the tipping point, as Malcolm Gladwell refers to it, which is hard to predict and hard to rely on. But I think if you just look back through history, it happens. So if we're consistent and persistent with our work in this realm, I'm seeing it catching on, and the mainstreaming of these ideas it gives me optimism. I know. Is that the way have you seen it that way?
Yeah, well, I think so. So from my perspective, a little bit of change model comes
Yeah.
into play, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we look at from a psych perspective is, have we hit rock bottom?
Mm.
Honestly, when people are going to move is when they see that where they are can't get any worse, and therefore they're willing to try something different. And I really hate to say that I have that feeling in our nation right now, but the interesting point is that it doesn't matter which side of the coin someone falls.
Yeah.
Everyone is frustrated. People
Yeah.
are tired of the news. People are tired of the stress. People are tired of their children struggling. People are tired, and frankly, I should probably just stop there and say people are tired, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think when that happens, this is when we see an alcoholic change. This is when we see someone who maybe doesn't have a mental illness, but does have poor coping mechanisms and patterns in their life say, I am going to do something different. That motivation shift has to happen. And in this case, it has to be nationwide because it touches everything, right? You can, as an individual, say, I am going to spend more time either actually at the water or living a life metaphorically that takes time. However, in order for it to infiltrate our education system, the way our businesses practice, the way that we value human experience. I gave it one of my last talks in government because I dealt in digital education. I started the talk off with, it's really great to own a really fast car, but isn't it even better when you get the opportunity to drive it? And I was really talking about automation, right? That we have to be careful because our lives every aspect of them are becoming automated. And when I talk to futurists and people looking in this automation space, we talk about things like, well, you're going to have a body scanner that when you walk into a restaurant says, here are the 2 items you can eat, bread or water, because you've already hit your caloric max today, or you can choose to run 3 miles later and you can have 2 pieces of bread with butter on it this time. And you don't even see the rest of the menu because it's been truncated specifically to you. When you look around the store that you walk into second, only pieces of that will fit you will be highlighted. And so constantly it will be this me focus. And I remember in that interview in particular, I said, so basically I'm just going to pass time. This isn't living anymore. This is simply passing time and counting the number of hours I'm alive as the definition of success. And so in my mind, number one thing we have to do is change the definition of success. And if we don't, then things like automation will help us be so efficient and technically effective, but demonstratively lacking in any kind of a life element. But you made another point that I have not written down, but I wrote it down in my book right now because I think you nailed it. You said in the Nordic countries, they value and support, probably financially, infrastructure, right? I know if you build it, they will come, doesn't quite work. But if you don't make it from an infrastructure perspective readily available and easy to access and encourage to participate, then you also discourage by design people's involvement. So I wonder if we could pull that thread just a little bit further, because I love your concept of Blue Mind for All. And I kind of want to say, if we could imagine 20 years from now, and we had this infrastructure set up in a way that encouraged positive behavior, a calming of the mind, and a participation in life, what would be those structures, either metaphorical or actual, that we would want to put into place?
Yeah, well, I think pools are a big part of it. So, public swimming pools that are well maintained, are safe, that are designed with this goal in mind. And it isn't just a facility to swim laps at. That's the old idea. I see people using pools nowadays. They're doing pull-ups on a pull-up bar, but their body weighs 670 pounds. So they would never do a pull-up on land, but in the water, they can reach up and pull their body like that. And that does two things. It's exercise, but it's pride. And so the man that I'm
Yeah.
referring to literally said, in the water, I feel like an angel. And I've never felt like
Oh,
an angel in my whole life because I'm 676 pounds. Wow.
yeah.
So just start with that. You go, okay, I feel like an angel. Therefore, I want to work out a little more. I want to get my body into some shape, which means losing a few pounds and moving more. And he's a very talented rap artist in Oakland. So I want to live. I want to feel like an angel on land too. Well, that's what water does for us. It gives us this buoyancy. And by the way, it requires that you leave your technology and whatever scanners are, at least right now, on the pool deck or back in your locker, or better at home. So uh, building the infrastructure, building the pools, making sure we have, kids are learning to swim. This is not a new idea. The Red Cross promoted it decades and decades ago. They learned to swim opportunities and I think for everyone is a key piece because we have a history. This is we pull this thread a little bit, but we have a history of um, fraught with issues related to race and access to water,
Yes.
to lakes, to rivers, to beaches, and especially to pools. There's a very traumatic history of who got to swim and who didn't get to swim for reasons related to race. So some of that still exists, of course, and there are some great examples of efforts to kind of break that down and build pools for the people who didn't, who's at least when they were kids, they didn't learn to swim, but are now learning to swim. And so we could get into that even and talk about the great examples of communities coming together to build swimming pools for everybody so that all kids learn to swim, all kids that want to, and the adults who weren't afforded that opportunity are now able to get in the pool and learn to swim as 60-year-olds or 70-year-olds. And then that opens up, by the way, it opens up 3/4 of the planet for you to explore. And that's a pretty big deal. Not only the planet, but the creek down the street or the pond in your community looks very different from a person who says, I want to go for a swim or get on a boat because I know how to swim, to someone who says, I'm scared of water. So if we're getting serious about Blue Mind for All, it really requires getting in the water, obviously, doing it safely with a skilled group of instructors, and those are swim teachers, lifeguards, coaches, and I think we're trending towards closing public pools rather than opening them, and
Maintenance
so.
and legalities.
Mhm.
I mean, well, you're in California, but we're from Florida, and so same thing. That was where my head was going. Was I thought, what are the odds that we would be able to do this in public schools, knowing that we lose one child and it's one child too many? So
Right.
this is where it gets difficult. Yeah, liability.
Yeah. And so I think it needs to be well thought through, well designed, extremely safe. Of course, if you're underwater too long, you die. You know, that's real. So, uh, you know, I work with a lot of people who, first and foremost, they're about safety. One of the best lifeguards in the world, Bruckner Chase, does educational videos with NOAA to help people know how to identify swift currents and rip currents,
Yeah.
so that when every summer we hear these reports of people being swept out and not coming back because they just went for a swim. So we obviously want to avoid that, but I think we can do it. I mean, you gave the example of Scandinavian countries. They think Blue Mind. They learn Blue Mind in preschool, and they know that time spent in the water with each other on a really terribly dark, gloomy winter day is really good for your mental
Yeah.
health. Not just for your mental health, but your physical health and your social health. And so they prioritize pools, spas, hot springs. It's not just a something you dream about doing once in your life, you do it weekly, if not daily.
They
And
do. In fact, to an extreme. I'll I don't even know if I should share this story, but there is an official photo by the official photographer of Finland, and I am ice fishing. However, the delegates from the other nations are actually in the water.
in the water. Oh yeah.
They're in the water. It was February in Finland,
Wow.
and I thought, this is nuts. But in our cultural training, this is, sometimes we go out and have these experiences to learn. And I remember just standing there going, there is not a chance I'm getting in that water. But I was the rare one, certainly.
Yeah.
They were all very familiar, and with the saunas, that is time, and you are expected, which is so contrary to our culture. You are expected to participate in that time as a delegate, meaning if we're going to do good government-to-government work, we are going to spend time. In fact, the Secretary of Defense for Hungary said to me, if we are going to work together, we must first be friends.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, what a profound statement. There is value in spending time that appears to be off work time, and to do it specifically near the water.
Yeah.
We always had pools actually at our meetings, and we were encouraged to continue to get to know that. We were, and it was something almost that we didn't want to mention when we came back because it's not valued in our culture.
Mm-hmm. Well,
not only
is it not valued, and we're increasingly uncomfortable with the idea of maybe wearing a swimsuit in the company of a colleague. I mean, there are concerns around that, but let alone sit in a hot tub together and have a conversation. But I think, I mean, that's, if it's part of your norm, if it's common knowledge that is good for you and very common to do it, so this is a slight aside, but we did our 9th annual Blue Mind Summit at Esalen, which is famously known for its history of sort of self-actualization and has these great hot springs. And I had my 14-year-old daughter there with me, and I said, you want to go to the hot springs at night? And it's clothing optional. And everybody opts for no clothing. And that's not it's not my norm. I usually wear clothes, and I usually swim in clothes. I usually go into hot tubs in clothes, and as does she. But we went, and it was just absolutely regular. And it was dark hot springs. It wasn't creepy. It wasn't weird. People, hung up their clothes, took a shower, got in the hot spring. Everybody's just a shadowy kind of silhouette anyway. And then these great conversations. And that's so far, it seems so fringe to our culture, but it really is our background. It's our legacy. It's our tradition, and for all people. So just getting in the water together, learning to be comfortable and competent in the water, has all of these benefits. And I think we can look to Scandinavia in the way that they approach it and make it part of what you learn in school, that not just water, but that nature itself is a place to go for all of these cognitive and emotional benefits. And the research is increasingly clear. So, we'll always refer people to the peer-reviewed journals if they're interested, and it all just says, yes, you're right.
It is. And I'll add to that it definitely is supportive. But we used to joke that when the answer was dog bites man, that although it was science, it was really just science telling us what we already know. Yeah. So I think, whatever perspective you come from, whether it's personal experience or from a scientific background, we're just trying to make sure we're not missing anything.
Yeah.
But something I want to hit on and highlight is, because I think it's really relevant today, although I will give the disclaimer that we were always appropriately dressed in all cases whenever we were in official duty. Yeah. So I want to make sure that I don't get misquoted on that at any point.
Right.
Just because it's important.
Yeah, for the record.
Case. But
yes.
For the record, I want to make sure. Yes. No. We did cultural events that were all appropriate.
Yes.
And above the water, if you will,
Mhm.
pun intended. But body comfort. This is something that we're hearing a lot about,
Mhm.
and we focus predominantly on women. But to your point earlier, everyone is starting to experience this. We
Mhm.
are we are seeing a number of changes in our size
Mhm.
compared to even when I was a child. My children, well, they're adults now, but they're young adults,
Mhm.
and they are considered small. And I was saying to my daughter the other day, I said, no, I was average. I
Mhm.
would not have been considered thin.
Yeah.
And so, our food is different, our
Mhm.
exercise habits are
Mhm.
different, our involvement in the environment is different, but so too has that cost us comfort in ourselves.
Mhm.
And that discomfort in ourselves can cause a lot of stress hormones, which only exacerbates the issue.
Yeah.
So I think, I don't know if you intended exactly this, but I think there's this element of how do we build the infrastructure? How do we educate to make sure
Mhm.
that people are comfortable and safe?
Yeah.
But then how do we also recognize comfort in self?
Mhm.
Maybe it's not just your body, it's
Yeah.
actually a total comfort in self.
That's a super interesting topic, and one that, in fact, there's some new research from the Laureate Institute for Brain Research, LIBR, LIBR, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, by the neuroscientist Justin Feinstein. For people who want to Google it, look on in the journal PLOS. Um, One of his graduate students is studying body dysmorphia
Mm-hmm.
and how flotation therapy, merely floating in hypersaline water, can be, if not a cure, a therapeutic aspect for individuals dealing with body dysmorphia. So what they're finding, and I don't want to say too much because some of it is not peer reviewed yet, but what they're finding is that being in the water and floating is really good for just liking your body by being comfortable in your own skin. So are we talking about this gentleman in Oakland who started out at 676 pounds when he started doing aquatic therapy? That it was so important for him to say, I feel good, because he
Mm-hmm.
mostly felt bad because it just gravity felt bad. Take away the gravity, he felt good. So people dealing with eating disorders, anxiety disorders, body dysmorphia, in whatever direction, overweight, underweight, whatever, maybe even related to their gender, right? Just not feeling comfortable in their own skin for whatever reason. In the water, floating in the water, changes your brain in such a way that reconnects you with yourself in a way that is extremely healthy. So there are issues about changing rooms and feeling comfortable on the pool deck, but once you're in the water, it's a different world. And and I don't want to overemphasize that or make it sound at all like it's a silver bullet solution to something as serious as an eating disorder, which is one of the most deadly diseases in for a certain age group and particularly young women. So I don't want to downplay all the other ways that that's treated, but getting in the water is yet another tool for our toolbox, and feeling connected to our own bodies in a way that water helps us do. And you know it. I mean, I don't have to say it. If you're listening to this and you get in the bathtub tonight and just relax and touch your shoulders, feel your skin, go underwater and blow bubbles and just, listen to this, how it sounds different. It's magical. It's wonderful. It's why we go to watery places for our vacations, for our special ceremonies, to have important conversations, to memorialize. There's a reason why we go to those places. So it makes us feel more connected to ourselves. And so the research, the science is showing that, in fact, that has a neurological basis, that the brain regions that sort of refer to our self opinions, I guess you could say, this chatter about ourselves that we seem to never be able to turn off. We're able to kind of calm that down while we're floating in water and just feel good in our own bodies. So I'm not sure that's exactly where your question and comment was directed, but I kind of comes back when we make that available, when we make those experiences available, when we look forward to getting in the water when it's been a really rough year or day or week, and coming back feeling better about ourselves, more creative, more relaxed, versus the divisive, distracted, burnt out mode that we call normal now.
And encourage.
And courage. Yeah. And where does that
Yeah.
go?
I mean,
What's
it's a sign of success. How hard are you working? I'm working really hard. I'm so working hard that I'm exhausted every day. Well, I know you're going to make it because you're working that hard.
Yeah, I haven't slept for a week.
Yep.
As a badge of honor, right? The lack of sleep is
Yes.
a badge of honor somehow.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. And it's time to change this discussion.
Yeah.
It's time to look at healthcare and wellness care and prevention as tangible, planned, supported spaces and activities. And that means we have to make decisions that actually create that infrastructure and support that cultural shift.
Yeah.
Which, I have a variety of lessons of things that I learned in government, but one of them that really struck with me was that when we act as a facilitative body, in other words, when we connect to those who are passionate, knowledgeable, capable, and have the resources outside of government to really make change happen, that is when government is in its best role. Mm-hmm. Because what we're focused on in those moments is really bringing the country together and connecting the units in order to create a holistic impact. When we get into issues, it tends more to focus on what are the regulations we want to make to tell people they can or can't do things. And that there is a requirement at times to do that, but for the most part, we see the most change when we act as a facilitative body. And so on that point, if there are two things that from a government role, and I'll scope this just a little bit, by government, I mean in the executive branch, not getting into the politics side of things, but getting into the programmatic side of things. How is it that we could help facilitate this cultural shift? Thinking a little bit about the multiple departments that are affected, right? Department of Education, mm-hmm. Department of Labor, and how they make recommendations for mm-hmm. how it is that, what a good work environment looks like. Defense, obviously, is well on board.
Yeah.
And certainly dollars come there. So
yeah, Department of Interior, of course.
Interior,
Commerce,
yes.
Yeah.
Yep. And so it really, HUD, thinking about how urban development can be designed to create a better system. You can think about two, because I know it can get pretty wide.
Yeah.
There's a lot there. That's my job, is try and pull all that together.
Yeah.
And focusing in my mind, what I'm really trying to think about is, I call it national readiness. Mm-hmm. Readiness, in my mind, is resiliency. Mm-hmm. It's the ability to have the coping mechanisms we need. It's the social structures we need to be ready for the changes and chaos that we know are coming. And we know these are all coming. So how, from a Blue Mind for All perspective, which I really love, I'm so going to repeat that one. What are two facilitative actions that you think we could focus on?
So I think a broad one that will cross all of those departments that you mentioned would be an update of the language in our legislation, in our policy, to include Blue Mind science. So whether it's the Clean Water Act, whether it's regulations related to health and safety, we've left out the idea that water has emotional benefits, that water has social benefits. When we talk about water's spiritual benefits, usually it's tagged to an indigenous group, which is extremely important. But water has spiritual benefits for all of us throughout our lives. Our most important ceremonies across all spiritual traditions are often involving water. So the spiritual health benefits of healthy water are not limited to our indigenous brothers and sisters. They're for all of us. So that, hence Blue Mind for All. So if we update the words in our legislation, starting with the Clean Water Act, to reflect the current state of science, not the 1970s state of knowledge, but the 2020s state of knowledge, then our policy will reflect reality. And then that's a platform for people like you making those words turn into action. So I think that's a kind of a big, broad one. And that may encompass both number one and number two, in fact. But that, I think that's the language we use. So the language, the text that we refer to, and then the other part would be when you speak, uh, extemporaneously, just from the front of a room, or in a very formal, scripted way. I would like to see a State of the Union where someone says something like, water is medicine for those of us who need it most. Wow, it's true. It's universal. It's uniting. It is true for our veterans, our first responders, our moms and dads, our stressed out teachers. It's useful information, but it's never been uttered from the front of the room at any State of the State or State of the Union address. And probably never from the front of the room at any press conference or anything of the sort. So, frankly, the closest thing that I've seen from a political person was that Melania Trump, in fact, said twice on the record that nature is medicine for our children. And there's a longer phrase. So let's be transpartisan about this. We want
Yeah, absolutely.
all political leaders, across state, local, every level, to understand what we're talking about and to put it into their stump speech, put it into their remarks at the Boys and Girls Club, put it into their remarks on Autism Day, that for autistic kids, being near the water, being in the water, is the best day of their year. It just is. Meaning it's the best day of the year for their parents and their grandparents and their siblings. So seeing an autistic kid learn to surf just melts your heart. It's a day of joy rather than a day of frustration. And so those are things we're not hearing from people in government, and we're not seeing it in our legislation. So those are two, I don't think costly. I think we can update the text with some amendments.
No, that is, yeah, the cost, it does not, if the only way we can solve a problem is with money, then we're not working very hard.
Yeah, exactly. So those are two things I would say they're both free. So update your talking points, and then update the words in our policy, in our legislation. And you'll see the transformation. I mean, you'll see it on the faces of the people listening to what you're saying, because everybody knows what you're saying is true. And it really is cross-cutting across, social demographics, across political demographics, age, all ages. Everybody knows water's fun. So those would be my two things. And that's not just for, the politics and policy and government realm. That's for my colleagues working in the conservation field. They leave it out every time. All the documentaries and websites and reports, they leave out the emotional benefits of healthy nature.
Yeah, you're seeing me smile because when I was reviewing, I'm not an environmental scientist, so I had to learn a lot to work on the strategy from last month. And number one criticism was this research practice gap. And I said, you haven't made this humanly digestible and relatable. You've given me the scientific facts, which, hey, I mean, I swim in that world. I love it. I got it. But it's not actionable. And so when we keep beating our heads against the wall saying, why aren't people operating differently? And we actually brought in a culture change expert from the Department of Energy. And he said, your biggest problem is you're not relating this to the human impact, exactly to your point.
Yeah.
And until we can help our scientists do the translation, we will continue to talk to each other.
Yeah, it's true. The way I like to put it is environmental scientists like to focus on the ecological and the economic benefits, and sometimes the educational benefits, but we ignore the fourth E, which is the emotional benefits. We completely ignore it. It's not in the Clean Water Act. It's not in any of our legislation. But wildlife has enormous emotional benefits to anybody who hears a bird sing, or gets a glimpse of a grizzly bear, or hears a wolf howl, or watches any natural phenomenon. It's transformative. It makes your life almost. It may send you off. Like my case, I fell in love with turtles and spent decades working to make sure they didn't go extinct. And so it's these emotional benefits that we they are the very reason biologists become biologists,
Yes.
right? I don't know anybody who said, I'm a biologist because somebody scared me into it. Or I'm a biologist because
We try though.
yeah, we try. No, every day. I'm a biologist because I was guilted into it, or I was shamed into it. And so, I mean, to your earlier point about hitting rock bottom, I totally agree that that's a powerful force. But if we're waiting to hit rock bottom in all of these realms, yikes! I hope we can preempt, through joy, awe, wonder, and love, somehow,
Yeah.
sort of lift up before we hit the rocks on the bottom. And I think it's possible. I mean, sea turtles still exist. They were
Yes.
all critically endangered
Yes.
or endangered or threatened, and now they're being downlisted. And it's not just because we had good science, and it's not just because we got the policy right. It's like there's a crap load of people who are head over heels, inexplicably in love with those animals, and you can't stop them. Like they're
Yes.
bona fide turtle huggers, turtle kissers, and you can't stop them.
Like yes, there is.
And that's it for every species that's going to make it. It needs a team of people that you can take their funding away. You can call them whack jobs, enviros, whatever, and they will not stop. They're going to make sure extinction doesn't happen for that animal. And that's it. And so how do we make more turtle huggers? That's really the question. And it's falling in love, not just freaking people out. And that's my that's my opinion, but also my experience, because I've seen the people who have saved places and species from extinction, and they're just totally in love with those places and those animals, and that's it.
I am so excited to agree with you and say that I truly, I mean, I went into this strategy development with an open mind, not knowing what I would come up with. And the very last thing I have to say that I thought I would be writing was we need to have actual policy focused on inspiration.
Yeah.
But if you haven't seen a copy of the strategy that we wrote, I want you to know the very first pillar of 3. I only made 3. I didn't try to do 50, right?
Yeah.
There are 3 pillars. Number 1 is inspiration.
That's
we
great.
have to create an education policy plan, support, access, connectivity to inspire people to fall in love, just like you said.
Yeah.
And I hit saturation in my interviews. I did not think that was going to be something I would recommend to the government, but that
was it. Well,
that was it.
And as a psychologist that we have a better understanding of the science of inspiration now than ever before.
Yes.
In fact, in the people who utilize that science the most are selling sugar water. They use neuropsychology to sell sugar water very, very well, by the way.
Yes.
And Coca-Cola has a neuroscience lab for a reason. They hire psychologists for a reason. It works. And so, and it isn't about manipulating through marketing. It's about transparency. So I talk about neuroconservation, which is about each of us understanding that inspiration. So I want kids to understand why a sunset feels so good. I want them to understand the neurochemistry of themselves and own it, so that Coca-Cola doesn't, I mean, nothing against Coca-Cola, but whatever brand doesn't own their inspiration. Like if the most inspiring thing that you saw today was an Instagram post by a company, you got to go outside. You got to switch channels, or change it up a little bit. So, kids should own their nostalgia that they're making. They should own their inspiration. And nobody's saying that really to kids. So I'm that's a great message there, that it's a pillar. But then talk to the kids, like, who owns your inspiration? I hope it's you. I hope
Precisely.
It's you and the places and the people and the music that you make and that you love. That's inspiring. And because that inspiration is going to get you through, and more than anything. So for me, it's water and turtles. That's my thing. And for other people, it's lots of other things, music in particular. So I think that's right on. You're spot on. Yeah.
What a great way to end this, to really focus on that inspiration piece. And thank you so very much for meeting with us. You have inspired me,
Oh,
not
good.
to be cliche, but I took a lot of notes, and I'm excited, and I think what's been exciting for me is to talk with individuals like you and see that there are solutions out there that we really can bring to the table.
Mhm.
Because when we go to Twitter and when we go to the news, we are starting to feel hopeless as a society. And when we see it, this isn't just a off the cuff idea. What we're seeing is saturation of person after person after person, no
Mhm.
matter what direction they come from, saying the same thing.
Yeah.
That is inspiring to know we have a pathway that's possible, doable, executable, and to point out your comment, it doesn't cost us anything.
Right.
So inspiration is the way to go.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, and I look
Oh, my
forward to talking
pleasure.
to you again in the future.
Well, if we were in the
Bye-bye.
same room, I would give you one of these if we were in the same
Oh, I
room. But
love it. I
so I'll have
love
to get
it.
it to you somehow. But
Well,
yeah.
I'll be in California at some point. I will
Oh,
come
great.
find you.
Excellent. Perfect. Here's your
Nice to
marble.
meet you.
All right. Likewise. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. So long.